Hello everyone, hi. So today I would like to talk a little bit about my experience of having exams in my first semester of studying literature at university. And there are two reasons why I want to do this. The first one is that back when I went to school, so all throughout grammar school, middle school and high school, I was actually quite a bad student, and I just didn't have good grades at all, and schools and exams was something I was terrified of. And I was a little bit afraid that that experience would recur when I decided to study literature half a year ago. So now I can sort of cross-compare my experiences after my first exam period, and that's what I want to muse on a little bit today. The second reason is because I used to be very curious what exams in literature would look like on a university level. I had no idea. When I looked into studying literature, I really wanted to know what kinds of questions are actually asked specifically, or how do professors make sure that I know I have the tools to work with texts, what does it tangibly look like? So that's what I'm gonna talk about in the second part of this video. I'm gonna go through the courses I had and tell you specifically which kinds of questions were asked and what I had to study for that. And then all the way at the end of the video, I'm actually gonna read you one of the essays that I had to write as part of one of my exams, so you get a real tangible taste of what it is that I have to produce to pass my first semester. And I did pass, so that much I can already say. It all went well, it all went very well actually. So yeah, that's the video today. If that sounds good to you, I hope that you'll subscribe, and let's get into the main part of this video. So as I already said, when I think back on my days in high school, when I think back 10 years ago, it seems like my school days were filled with dread about the upcoming exams, and it feels like my school time was just filled with these horrible dates of those horrible days where those horrible exams are gonna happen, and I'm gonna somehow have to figure out a way to press that knowledge into me, to just learn things by heart that I don't understand, so I can hopefully pass, and I hopefully never have to remember those things again. I mean, don't get me wrong, there were subjects that I liked and I was good at. So I remember religion, philosophy, music, and biology. I think those were... I always had great grades in those subjects, but most others were sort of a dread, especially mathematics and French. I flunked French every year for 5 years. I had to redo an exam after the summer so that I could proceed with my high school. So once I didn't even pass that one, I had to redo the entire year, because French was just too much for me to learn by heart. I didn't like my teacher. It was just really difficult, and that is ridiculous if I'm thinking about how much now, 10 years later, I love the French language. I love French. My favorite novel is written in French. I love French movies, French music. I moved to Belgium and spoke French for an entire year at some point. It is serious between me and that language. I'm thinking about doing a semester abroad in Paris, leaving everything I love here and Eric and my piano and everything behind to go to Paris, because I love the language so much. But I hated it in school, and that just tells me that there is something wrong with the way languages are taught in high school, and it makes me really sad that I detested that language so much, and I also didn't feel like I really learned anything. So that just is a little bit of a background of my story. I can happily say that my trauma around having exams is now slowly fading away. It feels like university is giving me an entirely different experience in that regard. So the university system is so different from the school system that it actually makes me excited to learn things now. I just really enjoy this sort of equal relationship between professors and students. You know, everyone's really respectful. There isn't this intense perceived hierarchy of someone telling me what to do. No one's actually forcing me to do anything, you know. It's all my responsibility of what I want to learn and which courses I want to take. And that approach actually makes me want to study more and makes me want to just be responsible about my own learning. And I feel like I can really show up now that I'm not being pushed into studying something that I don't want to study. So of course it helps that the subject I've chosen I'm super passionate about. You know, I love literature and I love languages, but there's also something different about the way the exams are set up. At least I perceive that now in university, it's much more about transferring knowledge in a respectful way. You know, the professors give us the tools that we need to learn about these texts and to interpret them and give us the background and the history and everything. And it feels like, yes, there is an exam at the end of every course, because they have to in some way make sure that we retained what they gave to us. But it's not like the focus is on that exam, you know. It seems like most teachers don't even actually really like that they have to evaluate students with this exam procedure, and it's just something that sort of also has to happen, but not all the focus is on it, if you know what I mean. Also, I feel like in my university exams now, I have to like show my understanding of things, like my deep understanding and seeing connections between topics. And it's not so much about learning random facts or vocabulary by heart. So most of my exams are actually open book exams where I can, you know, use my notes and my resources and everything to answer the questions, but I still have to, show that I understood on a deep level what this course was about, which is a much more efficient way, in my opinion, to go about evaluating a student. So I'm sort of processing my my thoughts and my feelings around this topic of having exams, because my time in school really installed such a sense of inferiority in me that it's almost hard to believe for me now that I'm a good student. I mean, I almost exclusively have straight A's. I'm proud of that, and I just sort of, I can't believe it, you know, because here's me 10 years ago struggling to somehow get my A levels. You know, mathematics. I think if my dad wouldn't have known my math teacher and they sort of got along, I don't think I would have passed mathematics at all, to be honest. It was such a struggle, and it just made me feel like I'm stupid. It made me feel like there's something deeply wrong with me, that I'm not as far along as other people that understand equations when they see them or something. It just wouldn't click. I just couldn't retain the knowledge, and I really sort of went about my life thinking that I'm a bad learner, and that's just not true. it's deeply not true. And I'm so grateful to have this experience now, this counter experience, which is sort of showing me a completely different side of this issue, that I'm very well capable of retaining the information if it interests me, if it's taught to me in a respectful way, and if I feel like I can be independent in what I choose. And it makes me furious about the education system. It makes me furious about the fact that teenagers are spending most of their week sitting in classrooms, learning things they're not going to retain because it doesn't interest them, wasting time away from finding out what their passion and their calling is in life. So that is my rant on that. I've just sort of needed to put that out there in case someone else feels the same way. I think a lot of people have that experience actually of being quite bad in school. So, you know, that doesn't necessarily say anything about you. It says a lot about the education system though. So anyways, let's move on to the courses I had and the sort of specific exam questions I got posed. So let's start with my introductory course about literature and comparative literature. I've actually made a whole video, I'll link it up here, about what I had to study for my first exam, so that one goes way more in depth. But some questions that I got, for example, were, you know, name a book that Don Quixote has influenced, so a book that was influenced by Cervantes' Don Quixote, and describe the similarities, describe the influence and the parallels. We also, for example, got a piece of a text, so a piece of a novel, and we had to determine whether the narrator in that story is part of the world in the novel or whether he's outside of it. We also had to determine whether that narrator knows more than the other characters in the story, knows less than the other characters in the story, or knows equally as much. So there's these fancy words for it, you know, is the narrator, or is it homodiegetic or heterodiegetic, intra or extra diegetic? So I actually found that really difficult. I think that's one of the questions that I didn't get right, to be honest. I find it really difficult in like 5 sentences to determine those things. But that's a little bit how, you know, how they teach you the tools to look at texts and analyze texts and find out who and where the narrator is, and how that helps the building of the world and helps how the novel is delivered. So that were my first 2 big courses, literature and comparative literature. And then my 3rd course was on literary research. So I had to, for example, describe, if I got a question like, okay, research this female writer from the 18th century that lived in Vienna. How would you go about researching and writing a paper about her? And then I just had to name some sources of, you know, archives and libraries where I would look for sources, online websites, how I would research those, what maybe the problem with Wikipedia is, and what some better alternatives are. Yeah, so there was a lot of questions around, you know, which sources do you go to, how do you quote adequately, how has copyright and the making of books, how has that developed, things like that. My next course on the colonial past and the post-colonial present of the Low Countries, I have again made 2 videos about that, so if you're more interested in that topic, I'll link it up here again. And we've had to read parts of different novels for this course. And during the exam, we were asked, for example, what a specific text shows us about a specific colonial period, you know. So how does Hella Haas's The Tea Lords reflect the first period of colonialism in Indonesia or something, you know. What can we learn from this book about this colonial model or this colonial phase? So it was always based around one of the main novels we had to read, and then we somehow had to connect it to a historical event or some sort of colonial or post-colonial theory, and show that we sort of understood why that is an important text in that regard. So I got 3 of those questions. I had 1.5 hours, and I just wrote, I don't know, maybe 1.5 pages in total of my precise answers to that question. And then in my favorite course, the one about the topic of time and memory in modern literature, it was mostly questions about how different novels covered the topic of time, or conceptualized time, or simulated time. So, for example, how did Thomas Mann make the reader feel time through his novel The Magic Mountain? What makes William Faulkner's novel The Sound and the Fury a polychronic novel? There was also a little bit of Proust text on the exam. And we had to sort of discuss how Proust, in this little part, what he's trying to do with time. It's a little bit difficult to translate for me in the moment, but discuss how Proust makes the topic of time relevant in his novel, and especially in this little piece of text that you have here in front of you. And I read that. It was so funny. I was like, during the exam, I had 1.5 hours, so I was like busy writing everything down. And then there came this like piece of text of Proust, In Search of Lost Time, and I was like, oh my god, like getting a little bit emotional in the middle of the exam, which like really got me out of my performance mode. I was like, oh my god, so beautiful. I don't think I've read that yet. And I said to myself, I'll give myself 1.5 minutes to be emotional about this, and then I'll get back into finishing my exam. Eric laughed at me when I told him that. It was so funny. And then the last exam I had was on provocative literary theories. That was a very philosophy-leaning course about how different people throughout history, like Plato and Freud and Susan Sontag and whoever, talked about literature and what it is supposed to do, and how it connects with the human psyche, and how those theories and theses have been very provocative in their own way. And for that exam, I had to write an essay. So we got a pretty general sort of question, and then I had 1.5 hours to write an essay and sort of demonstrate my knowledge on this topic. So yesterday I sat down and translated that essay to English so that I can read it to you now. So it hopefully gives you a little bit of an idea of what it is I sort of have to deliver. So I had to talk about sort of the theory that touched me the most during this course, or that seemed the most provocative to me, and also demonstrate that I know of several topics that we talked about in this course. So, it was a very broad, open question, very kind of my teacher. And this is what this essay is about. I'm talking mostly about Adorno's theory on the failed Enlightenment and how it connects to art. And I'll get into it now. So, 1. Failed Enlightenment. In all intellectual debates, both sides tend to be correct in what they affirm and wrong in what they deny. John Stuart Mill. It seems to me that with their book, Dialectic of Enlightenment, Theodore W. Adorno and Max Horkheimer in the mid-20th century pulled what could be called a metaphorical break. They did so to hold a mirror up against modern society that asks, are we really as progressive and developed as we think we are? Is the free human being indeed free just because he escaped the constraints of religion? Adorno and Horkheimer would agree and say, no, our Enlightenment has failed. This provocative thesis touched me in a peculiar way, as it questioned in one fell swoop our focus on technological progress as the only measurement for development. Instead, their thesis focuses on inner development, on the independence and progress of our thinking. Adorno's writings remind us how easy it is to adopt science as our new religion and to commit the eternally recurring mistake of ideology again and again. Religious thought just transferred into positivism, resulting in the modern gospel that says, only what can be measured counts. Of course, their thesis was widely scorned and didn't find appeal with the masses. Even considering this thought would pose a threat to modern science that pretends to be natural, unquestionable, and without flaws. Reading books like Thomas Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolution, however, allow us to come to a much more critical examination of the problem of science. Namely, that science progresses through paradigm shifts, and scientific progress, in effect, is just a mirror for the current social realities. So what is our problem then? Maybe it is that we think we are free, and in reality we're not. We do have choices, yes, but what we can choose is the ever same. Our happiness, as Marx already asserted, is illusory. What's so tragic about this statement, though, is that nothing much has changed about that since Marx, at least not in our inner life. As Ken Wilber accurately said, one of humanity's constant nightmares has been that technological growth has always run ahead of growth in wisdom, care, and compassionate use of that technology. In other words, exterior development has run ahead of interior development. Ken Wilber, A Theory of Everything. 2. The cultural industry. What concerned me even more was Adorno's accusation that the cultural and creative industry stultifies human beings. Grand pieces of art are rare, says Adorno. They are dialectic processes. They encourage us to think critically and to recognize how we need to change in the world. Zizek, who furthers the critical theory in the 21st century, says that a great piece of art is like a letter that informs you about your crimes. Out of my own experience, I can say that's how I feel when I read a great piece of literature. It is inexhaustible and it challenges me to change my life. Phony, fake art furthers our passivity, so Adorno. This kind of art just serves as a distraction from truth and from the change the world needs. He would probably agree with Bert Neumann, who demands that art has to be more than an ornament decorating the ass of capitalism. The difficult question arising out of this discussion, though, is this one. How does one make art within a capitalist system? It seems to be a rule of thumb that true art brings in less money. People prefer, after all, to be distracted, swooned and fed what they already know and believe. Who wants to spend the evening after a long day of work needing to think about how to change their lives? So how can artists focus on real art, true art, when they themselves have to eat and live? Well, maybe it doesn't have to be quite as black and white. 3. Dialectic thought. The opposite of a correct statement is a false statement, but the opposite of a profound truth may well be another profound truth. Niels Bohr. Adorno, as many other great thinkers, would encourage us not to think in extremes. Dialectic thinking means being able to think in contradictions and to understand that whatever the thing is we talk about, it already carries its own contradiction, its own downfall within itself. Like a newborn baby, expression of eternal life, whose only certainty is that it's marching towards death. Freud says that the difference between a healthy and a sick person can't be determined easily. It might not be determinable at all. And maybe it is the same way with art. Maybe even true art carries its opposite inside of itself. And maybe there's also something in kitschy art that we can grow from. This way of thinking feels shaky and destabilizing, though. It radically includes and doesn't draw lines. But it is, in the end, also a way of thinking that itself needs to be questioned, as I'm sure Jacques Derrida would have encouraged us to do, to stay skeptics, even about our own skepticism. All right, thank you so much for listening to that. I hope that gave you a little bit of an idea. And, I'll have very different courses next semester. I'll have language courses and seminars where there is more of an emphasis on regular little tasks, not just one big exam in the end. So maybe I can report back on how that is going. But for now, I'm feeling very confident. I'm looking forward to my next semester. I'm going to make a video soon about which courses I'm taking. And yeah, overall, I'm just, as you can tell, in the middle of rounding off this semester and making some videos about that. So thank you for being around for that. I have an entire studying literature playlist. I'm gonna link up here and in the description box. So if you want to check all of those videos out, you're very welcome to. And otherwise, I'll see you again very soon. Bye bye.